All right, Psalm 30. Let's call this one Pray for Mercy in this chapter, where we'll get to see David pray for mercy. Actually, in keeping with our theme going back to the very beginning, if I haven't already mentioned it, that there are times when we want life to go one way, but God is trying to get us to see that it really functions another. We are getting a chance to see in these 7 chapters how David prays to God in a way that might make our prayers to him more effective as well. Why? Because consistent with those initials that we have used, PRA, he in these chapters is going to seem to offer up praise or proper credit to God for the things that he has already done as he recalls either some of his own history with God or God's tendencies that will then inform the way that he concludes with a request or the thing that he is going to ask of God, or either counsel the people of God to ask of him, understanding all of the things that God has been willing to do in the past. And so in this chapter, it's actually going to bookend the praise that he offers God, because he's going to start with praise and then end with praise or recognition for the things that God is willing to do, as he's likewise going to recall the way that God has taken him from situations that seemed hopeless and actually turned them into a cause for joy. He's going to start that way. He's going to end that way as well. And in the middle, he is going to make his request. But the praise that he offers up in this chapter is not allowing his enemies to rejoice over him. Not so much for David's consequences catching up with him, but as we mentioned in the past, those times when people want to see him hurt, whether or not he's done wrong. He is praising God for not allowing those who would wrongfully rejoice in his suffering to find joy in his condition. Why? Because he's going to go on to say God has healed him, brought him back out of Sheol, and restored him, quite possibly referring to his sin with Bathsheba against Uriah as well, understanding that there was no sacrifice that could have saved his life from both the adultery and participating in the murder of Uriah and stealing the man's wife. And so even though David might not have physically been brought back out of Sheol, that was where he was headed by law for what he had done. And so he is praising God for giving him another opportunity at life on this side of death, as his recall of the way that God has delivered him from Sheol is going to cause him to praise again, saying that his anger is only for a moment, but his favor or his love is for a lifetime. In the famous passage, weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning, as David is going to go on to recall the way that he thought that his prosperity was going to go on forever once he got it, because God was the one who was propping him up. However, God hid his face and it all went away, causing David to remember what, again, we saw in Psalm 19, the danger of presumptuous sins, as he will then go on to offer up his request, asking God for mercy, quite possibly in this psalm offered up at the dedication of the temple, realizing that even if he is not praying for mercy for sins done today, if he still has breath and life ahead of him, there's a chance that he might mess up again. And in much the same way he's needed God's mercy before, he realizes that he is going to need it going forward if he is going to have any hope of succeeding. And seemingly for that reason, David is going to once again recall the ways that God has turned his hopeless-looking situations into an actual cause of joy, not simply relief, as he goes on to praise God and say that the fact that you have gone beyond simply removing my shame to restore my glory speaks for itself, and thus praises you. But the true strength in that praise comes in the life that David lives moving forward. And so even though he prays for mercy for things that he might do wrong going forward, one of the things we mentioned about David from time to time is you almost never see him repeat the same sin twice. And so even though under pressure David told some lies, you don't see him making a provision for going back to lying anytime things get difficult. Likewise, even though David committed adultery and conspired to commit murder, you don't see him making a provision to commit more adultery and conspire to commit murder whenever it gets convenient. And likewise, in being careless in the way that he carried the ark, getting a man by the name of Uzzah killed, you seem to see David turn from his careless ways and the presumption that doesn't necessarily get him hurt, but that can get the people around him hurt. He seems to be more diligent moving forward, helping us to understand that when God takes us beyond our shame to restore our glory, the genuineness of our gratitude for that restoration is seen in the way that we choose to live our lives going forward. One New Testament author states it this way: make no provision for the flesh to fulfill its lust, saying, just as David prayed for mercy, we're still going to screw up. However, we got to be honest with ourselves as to whether or not we are storing a little something away for a rainy day when something seems to be calling us to go back to the very things that made us ashamed in the first place.